we're getting news out of Russia from Putin actually himself that the Russian economy is beginning to stabilize. The ruble today was at 74, I believe, point 0.5 or point 0.8. I mean, I actually believe it was stronger for the first time. It was actually stronger today than it was before the conflict. So that's an interesting milestone, if you can call it a milestone. But Putin said during a speech that the Russian economy is stabilizing. Inflation is starting to stabilize as well. It's not rising anymore, or at least it's slowing down. The inflation rates are slowing down significantly. He also said that I believe he said mortgages and interest rates on housing are going to be decreased as well, something from like 12% to 8%. And he pretty much said that the central bank, they've got a handle on this, and so far, all the decisions they've made from the beginning of this conflict, when the collective West decided to go shock and awe, an economic shock and awe on Russia, that the decisions made so far have worked. He said they've worked. What do you make of his statements and where things are at right now with regards
Well,
to the Russian economy,
yeah,
the energy crisis, and all these things?
it was a cautiously from Putin. It was a cautiously upbeat view of the state of the economy. I think you've summed it up very well. He said inflation dynamics are slowing. I mean, there's for a while, because of the sort of statistical effects, headline inflation figures will continue to rise, but the actual overall rate of price growth has actually started to subside, to fall back to historic levels. And he said that prices of some goods have actually started to fall. Now, and he also said that the financial system is working well, and you're absolutely right. The ruble at the moment is stronger than it's been in 2 years. I mean, it's the more they've thrown at it, the stronger the ruble seems to get. So the ruble is looking very strong, and as we predicted on the duran, we said a few weeks ago, you can go back and watch our programs. The Europeans have capitulated on gas for rubles. They've accepted wholesale Putin's scheme about, you pay in euros for gas to Gazprom Bank. It converts the money, pays it into a ruble account, and the rubles then go to Moscow, to Gazprom. The Europeans said that would break sanctions. They've now said, well, it won't break sanctions. We accept that. So the Europeans have capitulated on gas for rubles, and Rosneft has floated the idea of doing the same with oil. And that's probably what's coming too, because what we've seen is that the Europeans a few weeks ago were talking about sanctions prohibiting imports of Russian oil. It's been pointed out to them by the experts, which, the obvious, that this is a very tight oil market at the moment. There isn't very much oil around. Janet Yellen, no less, the US Treasury Secretary, said, for heaven's sake, don't impose an import ban on Russian oil. All that will do is that oil prices will skyrocket. You and we in the US will face, even higher inflation. And as for the Russians, even if they have to sell less oil because prices are rising, oil prices would be rising, they might actually get more for their oil than they would if you just left things alone. So, from a sort of general wide picture, Putin can say to himself, and he said to this meeting where he made those remarks, he said, things are looking up. We've now got to start. We've stabilized the ruble. Inflation is coming under control. The banking system, the financial system is operating normally. Now we've got to start taking steps to improve the situation in the real economy. And we've got plenty of money because, money's pouring into Russia. We've got the biggest ever budget surplus we've ever had. We've got the biggest ever current account surplus we've ever had. We're actually we've got money all over the place. We can now start to use this strategically in order to support the real economy. And by the way, the person who spoke at this meeting directly after Putin, and who was the first person invited to speak, was Nabalina. So she's clearly the person who's leading the response, the economic response in Russia to the economic challenges that the sanctions have created. So I think the conclusion has to be that the Russians are coming through and that they are winning this economic war. I mean, the Europeans seem to be all over the place. They're now talking about imposing a price cap on oil that they import from Russia, or tariffs. All that's going to do, I mean, this is something which you've direct experience of, I think, Alex. If you start imposing price caps or artificial restrictions on price increases, all you will do is create shortages. Because in that kind of situation, if the Russians can can sell their oil more cheaply in, say, Indonesia or China or wherever it is, they can sell it for a better price there than this capped price in Europe. Why would they sell it in Europe? So you're only going to create shortages for yourself by doing that. I mean, it's a terrible idea, but that's the kind of economic illiteracy and foolishness that the Europeans are falling into. So they're talking about these weird and wonderful things. And elsewhere, you don't get any real sense of any real response on anybody's part to what to do about the larger economic crisis. There were some suggestions about, sending a NATO fleet into the Black Sea to escort Ukrainian grain cargoes from Odessa. Erdogan said, no way. We're not having, the Black Sea turn into a battleground. And they're coming up with very strange ideas like that.
I'm having such a hard time understanding the European response to the sanctions that they've imposed. It's so weird. They need to respond to the fallout and the boomerang effect of the sanctions that they've imposed on Russia, under the premise that they thought this would destroy the Russian economy, and it's clearly not. The only thing I can think of is that the collective West and the EU is consumed with just trying to get media PR optic wins. And what do I mean by that? They're running around, for example, trying to get India to change sides. Okay, even if India theoretically were to change sides and say Russia is bad, does it really change the economic condition in Europe? Does it really make a difference for the European citizens? I don't really think it does. It just kind of lets Ursula von der Leyen and Joe Biden get in front of the podium and say, you see, we got India to switch sides. Or the narrative about a Russian default. Is it really a Russian default? Is Russia really bankrupt? No, but they can go on MSNBC and CNN and say, you see, our economic sanctions have brought Russia to a default. So we want it seems like they don't really care about reality and what they're concerned with regards to their response to the economic crisis that they themselves created, is to just kind of get these iconic, is that the word, iconic, or PR? What's this?
PR, token, symbolic.
Yeah, like
symbolic
token PR victories. Yeah, not real victories, not like what Putin's talking about.
No.
Putin's talking about inflation is decreasing. It's decreasing its speed.
Yeah.
We're going to lower interest rates. Yeah. We're going to stabilize this. We're seeing our money supply do that. The ruble's here.
Yeah.
Europe isn't concerned with that at all.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it has a surreal quality. And you're absolutely right. They're going off to India. Ursula von der Leyen is in India. She's trying to get the Indians to change sides. Not going to happen. India, by the way, is it's an energy importer. So it doesn't want oil prices to rise. So it's not going to support sanctions against Russian oil. I mean, Why would India do that? It doesn't make any sense for them. It's a point which, again, people just don't understand. You can talk about a Russian default. The only default, as the Russians have said, is that the Western powers are not carrying through with their payment obligations. As we discussed in the live stream with Robert Barnes, which we did last week, the high probability is that this is going to lead to a flurry of legal actions, legal claims by bondholders against Western banks and Western governments. But, we'll just have to wait and enjoy that when it happens. But the point about the default, and this is where, again, they show a fundamental ignorance of the adversary that they're up against. We're back in 1998 when Russia did execute a genuine sovereign default. The Russian banking system collapsed. The reason it collapsed in 1998 was because in those days it depended overwhelmingly on external funding. Russian banks in those days got most of their capital in the form of loans that they took out in Western financial markets. That isn't true anymore. Russian banks don't go to Western financial markets for their money. They gain their money from depositors and financial trading within Russia itself. Part of the reason that's happened is because the Europeans themselves imposed sanctions on Russian banks back in 2014, which made it very difficult for Russian banks to get external funding. So the Russians had to develop their own financial system themselves. They've now developed it to the level where it is resilient and self-supporting and doesn't need external funding anymore. So if there is this manufactured so-called default, it's not a problem for Russia. It is a problem for Western bondholders and potentially Western governments, and conceivably even the Western financial system, if you start to see cracks starting to spread throughout the system. As I said, they haven't thought this through because, as you correctly said, they're interested in PR victories. They're interested in the imagery rather than the substance, even as conditions of life for people across the West get ever worse as a direct result of their actions.
All right, so talk about that to wrap up the video. What's the outlook for Europe? What's the outlook for the EU? What's the outlook for the EU? What's the outlook for the United States, the collective West? How are things looking?
Well, they're looking very bleak. Now, I mean, there's more and more talk now in the US of a recession. I mean, I don't think this is a certainty, actually. And of course, we're seeing very high inflation in the US, which is going to get worse. The US is a huge continental economy. It is mostly self-sufficient in most things, not everything, and it does import an awful lot. But it will get by, especially if they stop doing some of the stupid things that they're doing at the moment, like releasing oil from their strategic reserves and shipping it to Europe to try to persuade the Europeans to impose an embargo on Russian oil. I mean, these are crazy and foolish things that the US is doing. Same, by the way, with liquefied natural gas. The United States is now shipping so much LNG to Europe, doesn't make any big dent on European demands, but it is conceivably going to, before very long, start to cause LNG prices in the US to spike. So, provided the US sorts itself out, stops doing these stupid things, eventually the situation there should stabilize. Europe is going to go into free fall, because I don't really see any outcome. I mean, German industry is now coming out and saying it straightforwardly. It says if you impose embargoes, blocks on Russian oil or Russian gas, we're going to see a massive contraction. But beyond that contraction, we're not going to see a recovery, because the structural barriers in the face of recovery, which is that we're going to have to buy oil and gas at much higher prices than we did before, is going to be there permanently for as long as these sanctions against Russia remain in place. So, Europe is destroying its economic future in quest for some, well, you put it yourself, some kind of PR victories. Ursula appearing before the cameras, all of these people saying these things. But in the end, it'll be European consumers who will be paying the price and who already are.
Are there any other countries outside of Germany that are red flags, which you see are on the brink of collapse, or is it just
Well,
mainly Germany right now?
no,
That's
it's
the
not.
focus.
It's not just mainly Germany. I mean, Italy's in a very bad shape. I mean, its debt levels are rising. It is also heavily dependent on ultimately Russian gas imports. And, Mario Draghi went to Algeria because he was going to make this. You remember Robert Habeck going off to Qatar, and he came back and he said that he'd done this great deal with Qatar, and it all turned out to be fiction. Well, Mario Draghi did the same thing in Algiers. He went to Algeria, came back saying, I've done this massive deal with Algeria. We're going to get lots and lots of gas from Algeria, except that the Algerians then came up and said, that's simply wrong. We can't increase production to the extent that you want us to do. We are already producing as much gas as we can. We can't increase more. If we start to do it to the extent that you want, if we start drilling gas places and all that, we're simply going to run down our reserves much faster. And of course, that's not going to be good for us. So we can't do what you're asking us to do. It doesn't make sense for us to do what you're asking us to do, and we won't do it. Now, that leaves Italy potentially in a very, very difficult position. And of course, if under pressure from other central banks, Christine Lagarde starts to do the economically right thing, which is debatable, which is to start raising interest rates in the European Union and to start dialing back on the QE program, which has been keeping Southern Europe, especially Italy, afloat. Well, I mean, I just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it would be really disastrous for Italy, for Southern Europe, and indeed for the whole Eurozone.
Is the UK insulated from all of this because it's out of the EU? Is that why Boris is still pushing for much more escalation on all fronts? Because maybe the UK can weather this economic storm somehow because they're a little bit out of the system, or?
No, it's not. And I mean, I can say, first of all, prices in Britain are rising every bit as fast as they're rising everywhere else. There are now increasing numbers of goods shortages. You remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about sunflower oil. Now, rapeseed oil has also vanished from British supermarkets, and I'm seeing more problems with other products as well starting to disappear from British supermarkets. But I gather that the energy companies are becoming increasingly worried. And they're saying, that we can't cope with this situation if it continues indefinitely in this way. And I just wanted to make a particular point about British politics. Remember last year when it looked like Boris was on the ropes? And by the way, he is again on the ropes now. There are concerted moves once again to remove him. But you remember last year, I was saying that there were two particular politicians in the Conservative Party who seemed to be manoeuvring to replace Boris. One was Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor. The other was Kwasi Kwarteng, the Business Secretary. Kwarteng, of course, is responsible ultimately for energy policy. And it is very, very interesting that he has gone silent. We haven't heard a word from him for weeks. Once, not very long ago, he was all over the media. Now, I can't explain it. I don't know whether in private he's giving advice that the cabinet, the government, Johnson, Truss, all the others don't want to hear, which is possible, or whether he's actually choosing to keep silent. But whatever it is, the fact that he's not coming out, that he's not saying, look, everything is under control, we don't have to worry, we got it all in hand, the fact that he's not coming out with those reassuring things, to my mind, says a great deal. And the fact that he's also apparently taken himself away from the political battle, that he's not going to pitch for Johnson's position at this time, also suggests to me that he sees massive trouble ahead.
Will Boris survive if there's massive trouble ahead this time around? I mean, is that going to be the thing that brings him down?
The
economy?
extraordinary thing with Boris is absolutely, well, first of all, you're quite right. I mean, it is the thing that could bring him down. I mean, opinion polls in Britain now make it very clear that as far as British people are concerned, Ukraine is no longer the big news story. Inflation is, and the fall in living standards is, which is, I mean, it's radical. I mean, the fastest fall in living standards since records began to be taken in the mid-50s. So, this is really affecting people. So, in theory and logically, that should affect Boris. The problem is, within the Conservative Party, there's nobody obvious. There's nobody who stands out, who could take over. So Liz Truss, I don't think anybody's very impressed by her. The other person they were talking about, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, I don't think people are particularly impressed by him. There's talk of bringing back Jeremy Hunt, arch Remainer, and he's no longer even in government. He stood against Boris as the Remain candidate in the leadership election back in 2019, but that they might turn to him. I wonder whether the eventual outcome, I'm not saying the plan, if Boris does go, and if there's a really severe economic crisis, is to arrange some kind of national government, as it's called, a coalition, with perhaps Keir Starmer from the Labour Party as Prime Minister, except he isn't very popular either. So, I mean, we are looking at a political desert, and that's about the only thing I think that works in Boris's favour.
All right, we'll leave it there. The duran.locals.com. Use the code GOODDAY at the Duran shop as well and get 10% off all merch. Take care.